All right, Nick, let's take a quick break from the world burning with record high temperatures. There's war in Eastern Europe, democracy being tested here at home, blah, 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 blah. Let's talk about a fantastic new book that just came out. It's called First Phone, A Child's Guide to Digital Responsibility. The author of that book, Dr. Catherine Pearlman, joins us here on the Can We Please Talk podcast. Dr. Pearlman, Mike Leon, Nick Saveri, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast with us.
Thanks for having me.
So, we reached out to you because we've obviously had your husband on the program, the illustrious Jeff Pearlman, with a bunch of his books in the sports space. I'm curious, though, about your book because Nick and I both have our girl dads. I have two daughters. Nick has two daughters. What made you want to write a book about teaching kids responsibility to this? Because there's a lot of parents right now, and I know your book is for kids, but there's a lot of parents across different age ranges struggling when to give a kid a device. Obviously, how can they get information faster? Computers, laptops, tablets, it's all out there. What made you want to write this book? And tell us a little bit about the book.
So the book is for 8 to 13, 7 to 14-year-olds, and it teaches them everything, the basics they need to know about etiquette, social media, self-care, when to Google, what not to Google, a little bit of porn, sexting, basically an introduction of everything they need to know, scams, phishing, and how to stay safe and sane online. And I wrote it because a few things started to happen. First of all, cell phones are everywhere. And if your kid doesn't have a cell phone, they have an iPad. And if they don't, their friends do. So they have access to all these things anyway. And then the other thing was that I kept getting calls from parents whose kids were exposed to something, oops, by accident. So I don't know what to do. My kid saw porn. My kid was sexted. My kid ordered something on Amazon. Kids are getting access. They're making mistakes and they're not being educated for themselves. So when their parents aren't around, they have to make good decisions. And I wanted to write a book just for them. So this to me is a guide for parents, but to be read by kids with their parents or without their parents.
Dr. Pearlman, this particularly hits me personally because, yeah, obviously, as Mike had mentioned, being a parent, but also my wife's a pediatric intensive care doctor. So something that we've often sometimes seen is when she's dealing with, matters of older children that have run into self-harm, to put some soft language around for a moment. One common thread that she has seen often is the role that social media has played. And with that in mind, one thing I noticed in your book is just the way it's framed, from the perspective of different characters. Like there's an approachability that you struck there that seems different than, I think, oftentimes common sense, all these different places that sort of are very top down, very parent, language driven. What was the thought there in terms of developing a book, not just specifically for kids, but like the way you've written it in terms of accessibility for readers?
So I knew that kids did not want to hear from another parent about what to do and what not to do with their cell phones. Like they have parents. So I wanted to have, me be able to use my voice as an expert, but then also to have these 5 relatable kids that are conglomerate of kids that I know, who kind of help tell the story, help tell about their mistakes, their uses, their learning curve, so that it's much more readable for kids. And when I created each one of those kids, I tried to make it so that every kid could find themselves in one of these kids, whether it's like a personality trait, a family situation, a disability, something that they could say, oh yeah, this is just like me. This is just like my family, being in the military, having family far away, whatever it may be. So I hope it's readable for kids and relatable. That was the whole thing I was hoping for.
Dr. Pearlman, I wanted to ask you because I thought about this earlier today in prepping for this interview. I think about my times, learning history, right? And the way the education system is under attack right now. And I didn't have as much access to technology as kids today have. Within your book, how can kids understand? You have a chapter called To Google or Not to Google, right? I know you mentioned it, but like, how can kids navigate this? When to actually look at something, when to not look at something, how to verify that something is real. And how would you advise kids? I know parents will be listening to this podcast. This is not kid recommended, but like, how would you recommend for parents that have these kids that are trying to navigate this world where technology is so pervasive, like you mentioned?
Well, I mean, I think Google is this, and whatever search engine is this amazing resource for us. And we get in this habit of just like having a thought and immediately Googling it. And I want kids to at least take a break, to take a second to say, is this something that I'm ready for? Might I see something that I'm not gonna like or I can't handle? And then if they do see something, to be able to talk to their parents about it very openly without feeling any kind of shame, and then learning from that experience. So like, just because it's available doesn't mean we should look at it, and that there are dangers. And then the more things we click on, the more things that are shown to us. And so I think it's important for kids to realize when they see something pop up, even on YouTube, that seems a little off topic, don't click on it. So I think there's that. And then also, on the internet, there's truth, there's opinion, there's falsehoods, and kids have to learn to be discerning young people about what's real, what's not, and how to verify sources or information. And there are a lot of ways that even younger children can do this. I just give them some simple tips about, is there a byline, and is the person a professional, and is it one of the big top newspapers, things like that. Can you find that same story in multiple newspapers? There's ways to teach kids concrete things that they can verify information.
Sounds like somebody's been listening to our program.
It's funny.
Right?
I got caught on the mute button. Look at that.
Yeah, that's right. That'll be edited out.
I'm smiling because Dr. Pearlman, you're hitting on something that we have talked a lot about, from the early, start of the show, which was about information literacy. It was interesting because Mike, you led off talking about, being, a different perspective for this episode. And it's funny because digital literacy in the education space is is the biggest thing that we see. When you think about the war in Ukraine and we think about climate change, we think of all these things, what often comes up is just that kids are missing out. They're missing it through education, or what they're exposed to on the internet isn't connecting to it. I bring all this up, Dr. Pearlman, because one of the other things I really liked about your book was that it also gets into, it's not entirely all gloom and doom. You have portions of the book that talk about, with a mobile device, how do you organize yourself? How do you actually take advantage of this to becoming a burgeoning professional? I'm a calendar nerd, by trade, because my digital calendar is really my livelihood professionally. And I really enjoyed how you started talking about some of the different ways to reframe the idea of devices in the hands of kids. And I just wanted you to be able to speak on that for a moment of what is the opportunity when students, have access to devices that can really just build them up in a way that prepares them to be more 21st century as a citizen.
Well, we saw during the pandemic what happens when kids don't have access, and not just because, immediately we needed remote learning, but, as research tools, as ways of doing homework, everything is connected these days. And I tried to start the book with so many positive things that kids can do on smartphones. These are amazing devices. I think we really have to stop bad-mouthing smartphones and screen time. And I think we have to sort of rebrand as to how can we use these things for good instead of evil? How can we use them for, some positive ways, some connection? And how can we set up limitations so that we don't take it too far, that we manage our self-esteem and we manage our time online, we manage how we comment and the way we treat people online. Like, those are things we can teach, and those are things we can manage. But I don't think we should throw everything out about smartphones. I think it's a wonderful device for a lot of reasons. And I try to also show with these kids in the book, one kid has diabetes and he uses his phone for like a life-saving device. My dad used it as well. So I think, there's so many good things that happen. I think it's important not to just poo-poo everything about smartphones.
Totally agree with that. I did want to ask you, what is somebody's listening to this program right now, and we've had a bunch of different parents that have written in. I was telling you off air about recently, we had an education correspondent on that wrote something similar that was more a guide for parents back in 2018 in On Your Comments. But what do you hope that people that buy this book or see this book in the bookstore, if they see it on Amazon or the local bookstore, what do you hope this book will offer those families?
I wrote it for kids, but it feels like a gift to parents because, parents want to help educate their kids. But it took me a lot of research and many, many months to write this book. Who has time for that? So what I hope is that it actually educates kids. It gets into the hands of kids that need it, but that parents use it as a beginning guide, as a way of saying, okay, we're on the same page and let's build on it. And I try and tell parents that, digital education is lifelong. We as adults are still learning. There's new scams, there's new technology, there's updates. We always have to learn. That's the world we're living in. And so we shouldn't just give the book and say like, good luck, kids, I'm out. We should use it as a beginning guide and then continue the conversation as the kids age.
Catherine Pearlman, before we let you go, we can't let you go without asking you this. The other day, Nick brought this to my attention. Your husband, Jeff Pearlman, is an advocacy for a lot of issues. I know both of you.
You're not
going
going to bring up the toothpaste thing, are you?
I have to bring up
we
have to ask her on the toothpaste front, because your husband has a big social media following, of which the two of us are part of this. He even mentioned that he was trying to write a book one day on gun ownership and gun zealots and stuff like that. And I don't understand the love affair with guns either, but that's a different. No, so I'm in his book. Your husband posted on social media about arguing with somebody, and he would use this toothpaste in hand-to-hand combat with him. Your thoughts when he hit sent on that tweet?
Oh,
he should have read the book.
I regularly don't read my own husband's Twitter because I think he is a oversharer, and I think he sends things out of anger. And if you met him in person, he is not like that at all. So I think he gets caught up, and he has been learning over the years. He used to be a little more angry on Twitter, and he's come a long way. So he's sort of a model for toning it down, but he's not there yet. We're working on it.
Would there be a book for a guide to digital responsibility for that could be passed along in the Pearlman house?
But written in a way that's accessible, that you could be as young as like 9, say years old, all the way up to like an adult.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
Yes, that's such a great idea. I'm going to do that. I'm going to get that book.
Well, listen, I mentioned this to your husband. I love his podcast too, Writer Sling and Yang, and I love the intro that your son does about saying his podcast stinks. And that's one thing that's always made me laugh. So much success to him. But for Catherine Pearlman's book, it is now available out wherever books are sold. Nick and I both have copies. First Phone: A Child's Guide to Digital Responsibility. Can't thank you enough for coming on the program today, Catherine Pearlman. Continued success to you. Please stay safe.
Thank you so much.